you ever struggled to tell the difference between a chichchaff or a willow warbler or even a sedge warbler and a reed warbler? I did when I first began bird photography. They're notoriously difficult birds to identify due to the habitat that they live in. Warblers in general tend to be drab looking birds. They blend in very well with their environment, which is a challenge in itself. So what I want to do in this video is share with you my approach to photographing warblers that arrive here in the UK in late spring and early summer. What we'll do is we'll look at the Warbler family as a group. I'll look to identify 4 warblers that we get here in the UK that are notoriously difficult to identify. Look at some behaviour from warblers. Talk about my approach to how I go about photographing warblers, and I'll give you some top tips along the way. Okay, what I want to do now is look at the Warbler family as a group of birds, or a species of birds. There are over 400 different warblers throughout the world, with nearly 40 of those residing here in Europe. And here in the UK, there are approximately about 20. The warblers themselves are grouped into 4 different categories. You have your leaf warblers, which spend the majority of the time up in the treetops, things like wood warblers. You then have your reed warblers, as the name suggests, spend the majority of the time in and around reed beds, things like your reed warbler, your sedge warbler. Then you have your locustella warblers, which tend to habitat dense vegetation, like your grasshopper warblers. And then there's the sylvia warblers, which live in and amongst scrubland, birds like the Dartford warbler. So they're the 4 basic groups of warblers that we have here in the UK. We're now going to look at 4 warblers that we get here in the UK that arrive every spring and summer. 2 leaf warblers, the chichchaff and the willow warbler, and 2 reed warblers, the sedge warbler and the reed warbler itself. They're probably 4 of the most common of the warblers that people will struggle with identifying and telling the difference. Top tip: when it comes to bird calls, bird songs, there's a great app that's now available. It's called the Marelon App. You can get it onto your mobile phone. I've just put it on here, and I'll put that up and the birds that it's recognised. But it has improved my bird recognition, especially when it comes to songs and calls, so much. It's an absolutely fantastic app to have, and any bird photographer, bird watcher, you have to get this app. It's just absolutely fantastic. So top tip, especially for warblers, to differentiate the difference in the calls, then the Marelon app is a great aid to your photography. Okay, the first 2 warblers that we're going to look at are the leaf warblers. So both the chichchaff and the willow warbler are often seen flitting around the foliage of woodlands in the tops of trees. Both birds are largely shades of green and yellow, and they have eye stripes that are distinguishable from other warblers. But it is difficult to tell the difference between the chichchaff and the willow warbler, and that's what we're going to cover next. So starting with the chichchaff. The chichchaff is a mix of olive, brown and grey. It does have an eye stripe, which is important to note, but one of the most distinguishable features about the chichchaff and the difference between it and the willow warbler is the colour of its legs. Chichchaffs have dark coloured legs, and they also have shorter prominent wings on the side compared to the willow warbler. I mentioned earlier how important it is to recognise calls of the warblers, and it really is important to be able to tell the difference between chichchaff and willow warbler when it comes to the call. The chichchaff gets its call from its name, chichchaff, chichchaff, and it's pretty easily recognisable, and for such a small bird it's quite a loud song that you will hear mixed amongst the other woodland birds. It does tend to stick out, and they often sing it from a high vantage point, but normally in amongst the leaves, and again, difficult to see the bird, but you can hear them, and here its call is now. So where are we going to find chichchaffs? Well, chichchaffs can be found mainly in open woodland, parks, gardens and scrubland. They feed mainly on insects and spiders, and when they're feeding they can often be seen with a very distinctive downward movement of the tail when it's feeding, and again that's an important recognition feature compared to the willow warbler, which doesn't carry out that movement. When it comes to the willow warbler, generally willow warbler have a more yellowish appearance than the chichchaff. Again, they have a grey-green back, big indicator. Go back to the legs. This is one of the big differences between chichchaff and willow warbler. The willow warbler has pale legs compared to the chichchaff, which has dark legs, and that's a top indicator for telling the difference between chichchaff and willow warbler. They have pale underparts and they have a more distinctive yellow eye stripe than the chichchaff, although that on its own isn't reliable enough. What is reliable enough is the call, and there's a big difference between the call of the willow warbler and the chichchaff. Whereas the chichchaff is the repetitive chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, the willow warbler has a more musical, repetitive cascade of notes, which is totally different from the chichchaff, and here it is. So where are we going to find the willow warbler? Well, you will find willow warblers mixed in and amongst chichchaffs. So they tend to inhabit woodland, things like commons, heathland and scrubland. Where you won't find chichchaff, you will find willow warbler. The diet consists, again, similar to the chichchaff, insects, spiders, but in the autumn they will also start to eat berries. So when we come to compare the chichchaff and the willow warbler side by side, generally you'll see that the willow warbler is more yellowish than chichchaff. The willow warbler tends to have a more distinctive eye stripe than the chichchaff. The chichchaff has darker legs than the pale legs on the willow warbler, and the willow warbler has a longer wing projection than the chichchaff. Point to note, again, movement of the tail on the chichchaff when it's feeding, which the willow warbler doesn't do, and the calls, again, are very different. That is the big indicator, is the call. If you see the bird and you hear it sing, you should be able to tell whether it's a chichchaff or a willow warbler. One of the most fundamental aspects of bird photography is to try to get to eye level of your subject. Now, warblers, especially birds like the sedge warbler and the reed warbler, they do like to perform their songs at height, high up in the reeds. So if there are any vantage points that you can take advantage of to get to height, to get to eye level with a bird, then look for them. Things like bankings along river banks. Can you get above the bank so that you can get eye level with a bird? So get eye level with a bird and focus on the eye. Most modern day mirrorless cameras have automatic eye recognition, and that should nail the focus straight away. So eye level, focus on the eye. We'll now move on to looking at two warblers within the reed warbler family, the sedge warbler and the reed warbler. They both can be found in similar habitats. They're mostly brown in colour with elongated bodies, and that allows them to move freely through thick vegetation in the habitat that they live in. Both the sedge warbler and the reed warbler are larger than the chichchaff and the willow warbler. Okay, we'll start with the reed warbler. It's often heard before it's seen. It's mainly brown overall. It's got brown upper parts, pale underparts. It has a white chin and chest and brown legs. It is an unstreaked brown warbler, and that's an important point to remember, that the reed warbler has no streaks on it. When it comes to the reed warbler's call, it's a complex mixture of churs with many different phrases. It's often heard in reed beds, but the bird, as I said, often heard, not seen a lot. So they're quite difficult to see within the habitat, but you will hear them. And here is its call now. So where are we going to find the reed warbler? Well, they're mainly found in wetland habitats, including wetlands themselves, reed beds, lakes and ponds, and riversides. Reed warbler's diet, they feed mainly on insects, but again, come autumn time, if berries are available, the reed warbler will take them. Okay, moving on to the fourth and final warbler that we have here in the UK, the sedge warbler. The sedge warbler is a heavily streaked brown warbler, unlike the plain brown reed warbler. How to identify it? It has a brown streaked back, it's got brown legs, it has a distinctive eye stripe, stripe, which is cream in colour, and it has a blackish cap to its head. When it comes to the sedge warbler's call, it's been described before as a conductor without an orchestra. The sedge warbler's call is a mix of chattering, jerky notes and phrases. It's quite lively. The sedge warbler never repeats the same phrase twice during one song, and sedge warblers can also mimic other birds. They often sing from prominent points, and here is its call now. Where will we find the sedge warbler? Well, sedge warblers can be found wetlands, marshlands, riversides, but they're also found in scrubland and hedgerows. And as I said, they often like to find a prominent point in scrubland and hedgerows to sing from. Sedge warbler's diet, again, sedge warbler feeds mainly on insects and again will take berries come autumn time. So how do you tell the difference between the sedge warbler and the reed warbler? Well, the reed warbler is an unstreaked bird, whereas the sedge warbler is heavily streaked. The sedge warbler has a very distinctive cream eye stripe. And when it comes to the calls, the reed warbler's song is quite repetitive, whereas the sedge warbler's song is often very erratic. The reed warbler and the sedge warbler. Warblers, due to the habitat that they live in, spend a lot of the time in the shadows, amongst the leaves, amongst the reeds, and that in itself presents a real challenge to get close to them to photograph them. They rarely sit still for a second, and they're constantly on the move looking for food, or at the moment, I've just seen this morning, they're actually gathering nesting materials, getting ready to nest. So they are a difficult subject to get near to and to photograph, but this is my approach to how I go about it. Top tip, use a gimbal. I would recommend that you use a gimbal, and what I find that by using a gimbal rather than hand holding is that due to the habit of the birds moving around very quickly all the time, you can very often lose them, especially when you're hand holding. So that then means you're taking your head away from the camera, generally lowering the camera, and then you've got to come back up and try and find it again. With a gimbal, I'm on the bird moves, don't know where it's gone, I just raise my head up, try to find the bird, and I'm virtually, majority of the time, not far off it because it stays still on the gimbal. Another point to note is, always try and anticipate where the bird is going to go next, and then hopefully the bird moves into frame. So top tip, use a gimbal. Top tip, use a zoom lens. Small birds require long lenses. They're moving around, I keep saying it, they keep moving around all over the place. You need a big lens to photograph small birds. And I would recommend, I shoot with a Canon R5, and this is the RF 100 to 500, but I would say the optimum zoom range for photographing small birds, and warblers come into that category, would be between the 300 and the 500mm mark. So use a zoom lens. What I want to do now is just look at some of my camera settings that I use for what I call my wobbler mode when I'm photographing warblers. Firstly, I set it to continuous autofocus, which is AI servo on Canon, and that ensures that the camera is constantly focusing on your selected autofocus points. I set it to the high frame rate, so by using a high frame rate and taking lots of shots, it should result in some sharp images. So use a high frames per second rate. Top tip, set your autofocus to spot AF or single point autofocus. What that do on the Canon cameras, spot AF is a single point center autofocus on your camera. So if you keep that single point on your bird at all times, it should be in focus. And by having a high frame rate and on continuous autofocus and taking lots of shots, you should get sharp images. What Spot AF also prevents is your camera's autofocus system from jumping from the bird to either the nearest twig or branch, or switching to the background or switching to the foreground. So continuous AF, highest frame rate, and Spot AF. My exposure settings that I'm going to set, for small fast birds you require a fast shutter speed. So my go-to Wobbler mode settings are, this is to start with, 1/1000th of a second, f7.1 and auto ISO. Now, if you've got enough light and the light's good, then use a higher shutter speed. And that's what more light allows you to do, use higher shutter speeds. For these small birds, moving about, never stopping, you need a high shutter speed. So 1/1000th of a second, f7.1, auto ISO, and then if I've got enough light, I will raise my shutter speed. Okay, what I'd like to do now is just leave you with some of my favourite images of warblers, and I hope you enjoy them. Okay, thanks for watching this edition of Kevin Hatley Photography and my approach to photographing summertime warblers here in the UK. All we did ask is that if you've liked it, could you hit the like button? Could I also ask you to subscribe to my channel, Kevin Hatley Photography? It's completely free, and what it does is it just helps me to build the channel and give me that opportunity to share my experiences of wildlife and nature here in the UK with others. So, until the next time, stay safe, take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.